They dumped snow on my lawn for 7 winters in a row, and I ended up taking half their parking lot hostage. That sounds dramatic, I know. If you'd told me 10 years ago that I'd be standing in my backyard watching a chain-link fence go up like it was the final scene of some low-budget legal thriller, I would have laughed. I'm not that guy. I don't look for fights. I moved to Maple Ridge because it was quiet, predictable, the kind of place where the biggest neighborhood scandal was somebody painting their shutters the wrong shade of blue. Then the shopping plaza moved in next door. When I bought the house, the lot behind me was just a patch of scrubby land with an old warehouse that had been sitting empty for years. My realtor called it future commercial potential, like that was a good thing. I figured if something went up back there someday, it'd be a coffee shop or maybe a pharmacy. Something boring. Something manageable. Instead, we got Brookstone Commons. Bright lights. A grocery store. A nail salon. A chain pizza place. And a parking lot big enough to land a small aircraft. At first, it wasn't terrible. More traffic, sure. A little more noise. But I told myself that was the trade-off for property values going up. That's how I justified it anyway. The first winter after they opened, we had one of those heavy Midwest snowstorms where everything goes quiet and white overnight. I woke up, made coffee, looked out the kitchen window, and saw a 3-foot mound of snow sitting right at the edge of my yard. Not unusual by itself. What caught my eye was how cleanly it was shaped, like it had been pushed there by something deliberate. Turns out it had. The plow trucks had cleared the entire Brookstone parking lot and shoved the snow straight toward the back edge, which happened to be my property line. Or what I thought was my property line. I walked out in my boots, hands stuffed in my jacket, and just stared at it. 3 feet high, maybe 4 feet wide, running along the fence line. I assumed it was a mistake. They'd hired a new snow removal company. Maybe the driver didn't know where the boundary was. It happens. So I let it go. A week later, another storm. Another pile. This one bigger. I could see bits of gravel mixed in, and that gray crust you get when salt's been poured everywhere. By January, it wasn't just snow anymore. It was a mountain, and not the picturesque kind. This thing was layered with parking lot runoff, cigarette butts, fast food wrappers, even one lonely sneaker frozen halfway out like some kind of modern art installation. I remember standing there thinking, whose foot is walking around without this? My lawn didn't stand a chance. Now I'm not obsessed with grass, but I take care of my yard. It's the one thing that's fully mine. I mow it myself. I seed in the spring. I've got a little maple tree my dad helped me plant before he passed. Watching that pile grow week after week felt less like an accident and more like someone slowly pushing into my space. So I did what reasonable adults do. I called the plaza management. After bouncing through 3 different extensions, I finally got a guy named Victor Hale. Calm voice. Corporate polite. He said, "We'll look into it, Mr. Carter. Appreciate you bringing it to our attention." Nothing changed. Next snowfall, same thing. Plows cleared the lot, pushed everything straight onto my side. I called again. This time Victor sounded annoyed. Not outright rude, just that subtle shift in tone, like I was being a little dramatic about something minor. "The snow removal contractor is operating within the property boundaries," he said. "They're just doing their job. They're doing it on my grass," I told him. "If you believe there's a boundary issue, you're welcome to contact the contractor directly." Translation, not my problem. So I called the contractor. The owner, a guy named Mitch Rollins, didn't bother with corporate niceties. "We follow the lot lines provided to us," he said. "If snow ends up on your side, it's because that's where the line is." "That's not where the line is," I said. He paused, then gave a short laugh. "Prove it." That word stuck with me longer than I expected. Prove it. It wasn't just about snow anymore. It was about that tone, that assumption that I didn't know my own property, that I'd complain a little, then go away. So I started digging. I pulled out the original plat map from when I bought the house. It was old, photocopied a dozen times over the years, lines faint but still readable. According to that map, the back boundary of my property ran straight and clean. But standing in the yard looking at the shopping center's pavement, something felt off. The asphalt seemed closer than I remembered. The dumpsters behind the grocery store looked close. Closer than a respectful neighbor would build. That's when the thought first crept in, quiet but persistent. What if they weren't just dumping snow on my lawn? What if they were already on it? I hired a surveyor. $800 out of pocket. My sister told me I was overreacting. "It's just snow, Daniel," she said. "Pick your battles." But something in my gut said this wasn't about snow. It was about boundaries. about how easy it is for someone bigger, louder, and better funded to slowly push into your space while telling you you're imagining it. The surveyor came out on a cold gray morning. Tripod, measuring equipment, orange flags. I stood there with him while he worked, trying not to look like a guy who was secretly hoping to find something wrong. By late afternoon, he walked over, holding a tablet, and said, "You might want to see this." And that was the moment everything shifted. The surveyor turned the screen toward me, zoomed in, then traced a line with his finger. "That," he said calmly, "is your actual property boundary." It didn't match the edge of the asphalt. Not even close. According to his measurements, the entire rear stretch of Brookstone Commons parking lot extended just over 6 feet into my land. Not in one little corner. Not some harmless overlap. The whole back edge. 6 feet deep and nearly the full width of the plaza. 6 feet doesn't sound like much until you realize it included 12 parking spaces, the loading zone for the grocery store, and the concrete pad where their dumpsters sat. For 15 years. I remember just blinking at the screen. "You're sure?" He gave me the kind of look professionals give when they're absolutely sure. We ran it twice. That was the moment the snow stopped matching. This wasn't about sloppy plowing. They hadn't been pushing snow onto my lawn by accident. They'd been pushing it onto land they were already using. And the worst part? It had probably started long before I ever bought the house. I spent that night digging through old closing documents, calling the title company, even tracking down the daughter of the man who owned the place before me. Her name was Marjorie Bennett. She remembered the shopping center going up years ago, remembered construction trucks, temporary fencing, the whole thing. Dad mentioned something about letting them use a strip of land while they were building. She told me over the phone. He said it was temporary. They were supposed to fix everything after. Temporary. That word would end up saving me. I asked if she had anything in writing. She paused for a long time, then said, "I think I might." Dad kept everything. 2 days later, she emailed me scanned notes from her father's old file cabinet. Handwritten dates. A copy of a letter from the plaza's original developer thanking him for allowing temporary access during construction. No formal easement. No transfer of ownership. Just neighborly permission. That's when I called a lawyer. His name was Harold Kim. Soft-spoken, mid-50s, the kind of guy who listened more than he talked. I laid everything out for him. The snow. The survey. The construction notes. He leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. "They're likely going to claim adverse possession." I'd never even heard the term before. It means if someone openly and continuously uses land without permission for a long enough period, it can legally become theirs. I felt my stomach drop. "They've been using it for over a decade." "Yes," he said, holding up a finger. "But the key phrase is without permission. If your predecessor allowed temporary use, that undermines their claim." So we sent a letter, certified mail, to Brookstone Commons Ownership Group, which turned out to be some investment firm based out of Chicago called Halvorson Retail Holdings. Big money. Deep pockets. The letter was simple. "The survey shows your structures extend onto my client's property. You have 30 days to remove all encroachments, or we will pursue legal remedies." I won't lie. Dropping the envelope at the post office felt good. Their response came 2 weeks later, not from Victor, not from Mitch, but from a law firm with embossed letterhead. Dense language. Polite but firm. They claimed adverse possession. Continuous use. Open and notorious occupation. All the phrases meant to intimidate regular people into backing down. I read it 3 times. Then I drove straight to Harold's office. He skimmed the letter and smiled slightly. "They're testing you." "Testing me how?" "To see if you'll blink." He drafted a second letter. This one sharper. It included copies of the old construction correspondence from Marjorie's father. It outlined exactly why their adverse possession claim would fail under state law. It gave them 14 days to begin removing the encroachments or face litigation and daily fines for trespass. 14 days. That's when the phone call started. Victor called first. His tone had changed completely. Gone was the corporate patience. Now there was edge in his voice. "Daniel," he said, like we were old friends, "this feels unnecessary. Businesses rely on that parking." "I rely on my property," I said. "There's been no issue for years." "There was an issue," I replied. "You just didn't notice because I wasn't paying attention yet." He exhaled loudly. "You're going to hurt a lot of small businesses over 6 feet of dirt." That line stuck with me. Hurt small businesses. Like I was the villain in some neighborhood drama. I drove by the plaza that evening and looked at those 12 spaces. They weren't mom and pop shops struggling to survive. The grocery store was a regional chain. The pizza place was corporate. Nobody there was barely scraping by. Still, I wrestled with it. I'm not heartless. I understand that access matters. That loading zones aren't optional. For a moment, I even considered just selling them the strip outright and being done with it. Then I looked at my yard. The snow had finally started to melt. Underneath it, the grass was dead, yellow and flattened. Deep ruts where plows had scraped too close. Salt burned everywhere. The little maple tree my dad planted had a broken branch from where a chunk of ice had slid off the pile and hit it. And something hardened in me. This wasn't an innocent oversight. They had expanded onto land that wasn't theirs, probably because it was easier than redesigning their lot. And when I complained about the snow, they told me to prove it. So I did. A week before the 14-day deadline expired, Harold got another letter. This one proposing to purchase the strip. The first offer was almost insulting, low enough that it felt like they still thought I'd fold. I told Harold to decline. 2 days later, a higher number. Still not even close to what those 12 parking spaces were worth to them operationally. Declined again. That's when I decided to stop waiting for letters. I called a fencing company. If they weren't going to remove their encroachment voluntarily, I would make the boundary visible, tangible, unavoidable. The fence crew showed up on a bright, windy morning in early March. Orange stakes marked the survey line. I stood there with a cup of coffee watching them dig post holes exactly 6 feet inside what had been asphalt for over a decade. When the first metal post went in, it felt surreal. Employees from the grocery store came out to watch. A delivery truck driver stood there scratching his head. One of the workers asked me, "You sure about this line?" "Very," I said. By late afternoon, the chain link stretched across the entire back edge of the plaza. Clean, straight, unapologetic. 12 parking spaces were now useless, cut in half by steel and wire. The dumpster enclosure sat trapped on my side of the fence. Half the loading zone was inaccessible. It took 45 minutes for my phone to ring. Victor didn't bother with pleasantries this time. "What the hell did you do?" "I installed a fence on my property. You've effectively shut down our loading access." "I believe that's your problem." There was a long silence. Then, "You're being unreasonable." That word again. Unreasonable, I repeated. Was it reasonable to pave over my land? He didn't answer that. He just said, "This isn't over," and hung up. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt something close to calm. Because now they had a problem that cost them money every single day. And money moves mountains a lot faster than polite complaints about snow. The day after the fence went up, the plaza looked confused. That's the only word I can think of. Cars were circling slowly, drivers squinting at the missing row of spaces like maybe they'd just imagined parking there last week. A delivery truck had to back out onto the main road because the loading dock angle didn't work anymore. The grocery store manager stood behind the building with his hands on his hips, staring at the chain link like it had personally insulted him. And I'll admit it, standing in my kitchen with a mug of coffee, watching all of that unfold, I felt a small, quiet sense of vindication. Not triumph, not joy, just balance. 2 hours later, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from before. "Hi, is this Daniel Carter?" "Yes. My name is Elise Morgan. I'm with Halvorson Retail Holdings." Her voice was different from Victor's. No edge, no ego. Calm, deliberate, like someone who had already assessed the damage and was now here to clean it up. "I understand there's been a dispute regarding a boundary line." "That's one way to put it," I said. She didn't react to the sarcasm. "I'd like to meet in person, if you're open to it." We met 3 days later at a small diner off Route 8. Neutral ground. She showed up in a navy coat, tablet in hand, professional but not stiff. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, the kind of person who doesn't waste time. After we ordered coffee, she got straight to it. "Daniel, I've reviewed the survey and the construction correspondence from the previous owner." I waited. "You're correct," she said plainly. "Our property does encroach." Hearing someone from their side say that out loud was almost disorienting. "So what happens now?" I asked. She folded her hands on the table. "We need access to that strip. The redesign cost to move the lot would be significant. The tenants rely on those spaces and that loading zone. We'd like to purchase a 10-year easement." There it was. An easement meant they wouldn't own the land. I would, but they'd have the right to use it for a defined period. 15,000, she said. I almost laughed. "Elise," I said, keeping my tone even, You paved it. You've used it for 15 years. You damaged my yard repeatedly. And you told me to prove it. She didn't flinch. 30,000. Still too quick. Still too easy. This hasn't just been about money, I said. It's been about respect. I called your management multiple times. I was brushed off. Your contractor told me to prove it like I was some random guy complaining. She nodded slowly. I can't defend how it was handled. That strip of land controls 12 parking spaces and your loading dock. I continued. You're not offering me what it's worth to you. You're offering what you hope I'll accept. For the first time, she leaned back. What number would make this right? I had thought about that question a lot. 50,000, I said. 10-year easement. You cover my legal fees. You restore my yard fully. Not just reseed it. I want new topsoil. Irrigation installed. Replace the damaged tree. And I want a written clause prohibiting snow dumping on my property. Ever. She didn't answer immediately. Just tapped something into her tablet. That's higher than our initial projections, she said finally. I'm aware. Silence settled between us, broken only by the clink of dishes in the diner. Then she said, if we agree, you'll move the fence back to the surveyed line? Yes. And you won't pursue damages for prior use? I held her gaze. If the terms are met. She extended her hand. Give me a week. That week felt longer than the entire winter. Victor didn't call again. Mitch, the snow contractor, was replaced quietly. I noticed new trucks in the lot with a different company name on the side. 7 days later, Harold called me. They've accepted. I didn't react right away. Just sat there in my living room staring at the fence outside the window. $50,000 for a 10-year easement. Full yard restoration. Irrigation system. Replacement maple tree. Privacy hedge planted along the boundary. Legal and survey fees reimbursed. And a strict contractual clause prohibiting snow placement on my property, with financial penalties if violated. When I signed the agreement, it didn't feel like winning. It felt like closure. The restoration crew showed up in early April. They scraped away the salt-soaked soil, brought in fresh topsoil, laid new sod in clean, tight rows. They installed sprinklers that popped up with a soft hiss. They planted a line of tall arborvitae along the fence, giving me more privacy than I'd ever had before. And they replaced the maple tree. I stood there while the landscaper lowered it into the ground, soil dark and rich around the roots. It wasn't the same tree my dad had planted, but it stood straight, healthy, deliberate. The fence came down a few days later, moved precisely to the true property line. The 12 parking spaces reopened. The dumpster enclosure was reconfigured properly within their own boundary. Life, from the outside, went back to normal. But something inside me had shifted. For a while, I wondered if I'd gone too far. If maybe I could have handled it differently. Been more patient. Less stubborn. Then I'd remember standing in my yard that first winter, looking at that growing mountain of dirty snow, feeling small and dismissed. Boundaries aren't just lines on a survey map. They're statements. And sometimes, when someone tests them, you don't respond with anger. You respond with clarity. A few months after everything was settled, I ran into Elise again at the grocery store. She was walking the property with a regional manager. She nodded at me. The hedge looks good. It does, I said. After a pause, she added, for what it's worth, you were right to push. That surprised me. Most people would have sold quietly, she continued, or ignored it. You forced us to correct something that should have been addressed years ago. I thought about that later. Because here's the thing nobody talks about in these situations. If I hadn't pushed back, nothing would have changed. They would have kept using that land indefinitely. The snow would have kept coming. And I would have kept absorbing the cost of someone else's convenience. Was I stubborn? Probably. Did I inconvenience a few shoppers for a couple weeks? Sure. But I also learned that being reasonable doesn't mean being passive. And being neighborly doesn't mean being invisible. So here's what I'm curious about. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have sold the strip the first time they offered? Let it go for the sake of peace? Or put up the fence like I did and force the issue? Do you think businesses get too comfortable assuming regular homeowners won't fight back? Or was I just lucky the law happened to be on my side? I genuinely want to know. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was this justice, or was it overkill? And if you've ever had a boundary pushed, literally or figuratively, tell me how you handled it. If you appreciate stories like this, real situations where everyday people have to decide how far they're willing to go to protect what's theirs, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Because sometimes the smallest strip of land can teach you the biggest lesson about standing your ground.